Hey, well, it seems like the first thing to do is to call the meeting to order.
Great. And Madam Chair, visitor comments are part of our regular meeting, and we have no one who is not a already scheduled attendee, so we can move past that at when you're ready.
However, can I, for a moment, augment the comments that Dr. Peoples has made? I hope that you as a personnel board never have to meet our HR manager. So,
Neil, I am gonna disagree with that because I love to remind employees HR is a good thing, not just when you're in trouble. So everybody should meet the HR manager.
I agree. I sort of default to the trouble part of it. Sorry about that.
It's because you're an attorney. All right, we digress, Madam Chair.
Well, I don't know where that leaves me because I'm basically an HR attorney.
It leaves you with me.
Okay, so hearing no visitor comments, then we'll move on to the new business, which is a policy change, a new policy adoption.
That's correct. So Madam Chair and members, I'll explain this. So I'm going to start with some of our background real quick. And this policy, which is not subject to your purview, but is provided for information. We currently in the city of Webster Groves do not have a progressive discipline policy that outlines the process of progressive discipline. And this is something that departments, as we've talked about employee performance and coaching and all those matters, have brought up to leadership and such. So this policy, progressive discipline, can be enacted by the city manager as she determines and such, and will be enacted. So you can see this, and obviously it's very typical of many of progressive discipline processes that you're all familiar with. I think you all should have a copy of it or have access to it. The policy, and then in 6.01, it's referenced in the grievance policy so that people could grieve if they are placed on a status or such from this progressive discipline policy. The key portion of this and why we have asked you to meet today is in the relation to this status of administrative probation. Administrative probation meaning a written type of probation for an employee, not on the probation at start of employment, but farther on. That is not a suspension. It is not a demotion. It is not a removal from service or a separation, but really that plan of write-up and performance evaluation and such that goes with that period. Administrative probation is not recognized anywhere right now in the city's personnel policies, namely in the merit plan, chapter 2, which you all do have per the charter, the power to amend and such. And so our recommendation is to enact a progressive discipline process to include administrative probation, is to have you authorize the use of administrative probation, if that makes sense. So your action today is about this policy, which is a piece, a step that is a part of the progressive discipline policy that the leadership wishes to make for the city of Webster Groves.
So thank you. And I will add to that in terms of the progressive disciplinary processes Eric shared. It is something that not only department directors, but supervisors have asked about. And, being HR professionals, I think you would agree that it's not just in terms of a tool for the city, but it also for me is a protective measure for employees. I think they have a right to know what progressive discipline looks like, and how it would be outlined in the steps that they should be going through. In terms of rolling this out to employees, it's been my practice to get the feedback from each of the directors and their teams on our policies before implemented. And that's the same with this one. So it is now in that process. The feedback is, the deadline is Friday. I have been receiving some feedback, and what I'll do, and the feedback's incredibly helpful, aside from the typos and a couple of grammatical errors that are in there. It's really just small changes, but it's really important to me to have those department directors' eyes on it and to give that feedback. So I'll incorporate that. The content will stay pretty much the same. It's just small nuances, but I share that with you because I think it's important that you all know that we are receiving employee feedback on the policies that we put in place.
Before we talk about the merits of the policy, can we clarify the process here? So correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like we as the board are authorizing or would be voting to authorize this, to approve this policy that would basically authorize the use of administrative probation as a management tool, and then, but the act of actually, okay, maybe I should just stop there. So once we do that, what's the next step? How does it get incorporated into a larger policy?
Correct. So
Go ahead, Eric.
policy 2.14, you are correct. Any policy in chapter 2 is a merit system policy, which you, as the personnel board, per the charter, have to approve. So because we reference later on in the policy manuals like separations, there is a policy on how separations, how layoffs happen, that is approved by you. It was approved probably many years ago, the current edition. Administrative probation as a tool that could affect employment under the protected status of the classified service has not ever been authorized by the personnel board for the city. Hence why we're here. So that tool is what you have the ability to say yes, no, amend, change, whatever you wish to do. Policy 2.14 is what we have drafted as a recommendation. From there, then the tool is put into policy 6.15, the progressive discipline policy, which that process of progressive discipline is in chapter 6, much like the grievance policy is. Everything else in the personnel manual that is not in chapter 2 per the charter can be changed by the city manager.
So does the progressive discipline policy, the one that we've been provided with, does it currently exist, and the city manager would just be adding administrative probation as an extra step?
Thank you. That's a great question. It does not exist. We do
Okay.
not, as it stands, have a progressive disciplinary
Okay.
policy at all, which is why employees and department directors have asked for it, because it varies from department to department. So in my mind, this gives consistency in terms of what we're doing as an organization. And as I mentioned, I think it is a protective measure for employees because they will then know what those steps are.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Does anybody else have questions about the process before we talk about the substance of the administrative probation? Okay. Well, I just will start out by saying, to me, this looks, I guess this is a question. Is this sort of like an equivalent to period of, I guess, probably heightened supervision, and also, I guess, will the employee have some direction here? Like, will they understand what they should be doing within the 30 days and what will deem them successful or unsuccessful?
Absolutely. It should be a companion piece to the work plan or PIP, the performance improvement plan that departments currently use. So yes.
So you already use performance improvement plans?
So we do, but that again is where the progressive discipline policy comes in handy, because we don't have any formal process for the PIP. And so that is more commonly used within, for instance, fire departments and police departments. Our other departments don't really have a process. So this is that step, and again, getting that consistency amongst all departments.
So it's formalizing the performance improvement plan and I guess standardizing across departments, but essentially it is a performance improvement plan. Correct.
It can accompany the performance improvement plan, yes. And so my question is just my response is more direct to the, what I think I heard the concern as from the chair, that employees wouldn't just receive this and receive no supervision. Again, it is my intent that employees are treated more than fairly, especially during this process, that they do have that guidance and they know exactly what the expectations are.
Could an employee be on probation without or could they be on a performance improvement plan without the probation, or are the two always together?
They are not always together. There are certainly some things that an employee can be on a performance improvement plan without being on probation. You know, an employee, for instance, that has significant absenteeism or tardy issues. Perhaps there's a lot of other background information that goes into that. And so they're on a performance improvement plan, but they're not yet on administrative probation.
So do you see administrative probation as a necessary step in progressive discipline? Because so in that attendance example you just gave, if they're on a plan, but they're not yet on administrative probation, does that mean at some point you would expect them to go on administrative probation before, like suspension or termination would happen?
It's a great question. I would not expect anybody that gets on a performance improvement plan that I would see them on administrative probation. I would hope that with the supervisors working with them along with human resources, that we can always avoid administrative probation. For me, administrative probation is one of the final tools along that disciplinary process. So, Eric, I'm gonna give you that.
Could you describe the rationale or considerations that would lead you to make a different determination about whether a person who's in need of a performance improvement plan would go simultaneously on administrative probation or just simply be subject to the performance improvement plan without probation?
Yeah, I can, as I work through that. I think that really is going to depend on the infraction of the employee in the first place, because there are some things that would just rise automatically to administrative probation, perhaps within the workplace organization. Again, I think that's going to be the rarity. This is meant to simply be a tool, not something that is used in the frequent case, would be my hope. And in other organizations, I certainly have not experienced it being the go-to tool. So that is not the intent at all. In terms of another example of when someone might go immediately to administrative probation. Gosh. Luckily, I don't know that we've experienced any during my tenure that would be immediately there. So I don't know that I have an immediate example.
Are there other consequences for being in a probationary status beyond those that are attached to the work and performance improvement plan that's given to the employee?
The regular?
No, there are in administrative probation, there are no other consequences attached other than a status of being on the administrative probation. A regular probationary period at the beginning of employment does preclude the usage of vacation, standard things in that regard, but this is a separate status from the initial probationary period.
Going back to the question beforehand, one of the concerns in speaking with department directors is that when that PIP, when the performance plan is used and, the employee, and again, these are the rarity occasions, but when that employee does better, they improve, they're off of the work performance plan, they go back to, regular status, and then their performance declines again. So the administrative probation, to ask for those different circumstances, it also gets out of that hamster wheel, if you will, that, okay, we've now implemented 3 employee work plans, and here we are talking about the same issues again. So, it might be a final chance on that employee work plan as well. But the point I'm trying to make is that in most instances, it is going to be progressive. It's not where the employee would just first land. And we could put some language in there as I'm looking at that, in terms of if that would help the personnel board be more comfortable, but, indicating that this is for either those serious infractions, but that it is not meant to be the first to go to, or trying to struggle as I come up with language that we could add as a sentence to help with that. But I certainly would be in favor of that.
How would you just say it's more serious than just a written plan?
How is it more serious than just a written plan?
Yeah.
Well, your typical performance plan is just that. It's a performance plan to help with coaching of the employee, and the consequences are not in terms of whether it's suspension or termination of a position. The performance plan truly is coaching, perhaps some training, trying to shore up those areas that the employee is not performing well. Now, having said that, those are performance-based, which is meant for the performance plan, but some of the employee actions might be more behavioral rather than performance. And so that can be a different story as well.
And
You look like
Madam Chair, just to add to that, the performance plan in our application and hasn't been used is not necessarily a disciplinary function, right? Whereas administrative probation, that status is. So let's play that out. If an employee goes to administrative probation and then ultimately must be dismissed, in that successive use of discipline, the right to grieve comes back to you. And so from a management perspective, should that case progress there, you can see a progression of discipline, right? It's not simply from issue to dismissal, which unfortunately in our system exists right now because there's nothing in between other than, if there are write-ups, which again are not formalized, which are not consistently applied across the city. And so the goal is to provide a sort of a consistent track and understanding of that disciplinary process, both for protection of the employee, but also for the city as its own corporate entity as well.
So something like, because you had mentioned attendance, because to me, I feel like this would be a good tool for somebody like on a performance improvement plan that wasn't able to perform the duties of their job, but something like attendance, would this be used for that as well? That's what the way I kind of understand it. But to me, it's like you're either there or you're not. What would a specific plan for something like that even look like to say, you're not showing up at work?
with attendance, so I fully agree. But again, it hasn't consistently been done across the organization. But with attendance, I agree. That is something that you would go through those progressive disciplinary steps that are listed in the policy, verbal coaching, the documented verbal coaching, counseling, the written reprimands. But no, I don't see that as something that the administrative probation would be used for, because either you're there or you're not. And after you've had several discussions and a written reprimand on that, I think that one becomes pretty clear.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Maybe,
go ahead, Mr. Mason, sorry.
So I still want to just understand clarity on a few different things. So there's an explicit reference in the administrative probation language around the requirement of a work plan, which I think I hear you say is different from a performance plan, which is a general tool that's used for someone outside of the disciplinary process. I think I also heard you say there is the prospect that a manager can use some sort of performance improvement plan that is different from the work plan that's addressed in the administrative probation language, but is still geared towards addressing some deficiency in performance. Am I understanding all those things correctly, or am I confusing some of this?
You're not confusing it. Oftentimes, and I think what the work plan and the PIP may look like are very similar, but you can do a PIP outside of the disciplinary process, So again, go ahead.
And that's entirely, I mean, just so I'm clear, that's entirely at the discretion of the supervisor who's implementing the plan, whether it's a performance improvement plan outside of the context of progressive discipline, or whether it's one that is within this progressive discipline ladder.
Sure. So if we look at disciplinary actions, obviously it's about the idea that when coaching and that constructive feedback have not given out, disciplinary action has to be taken in consult with HR. So a disciplinary status has to work with Ms. Hines to really to step into that point, so that we're not just using discipline as a blunt tool, from a management perspective. If we're frustrated, that's not the appropriate use of discipline just because we're frustrated, right? So that's why consultation with HR is required to be able to administer the disciplinary status.
And that may seem like a given, something that we would all think should happen anyway. I will say that has not always been the case. We haven't had, as an organization, historically, we haven't necessarily had the human resources support for that to occur, and we now do. So before, disciplinary action may have happened in isolation, and not saying that it wasn't justified or shouldn't have occurred, but in my mind, it's a much better process that disciplinary action always take place with consultation and involvement of human resources.
Is a performance improvement plan administered outside of the context of disciplinary action subject to the grievance procedure?
I don't believe so. I would let Neil answer, and I say I don't believe so because it's not a
I think-
disciplinary action.
I think it is outside the disciplinary process because it is, there's nothing in our policies that identify it as a disciplinary action. So I think it exists outside of this process.
Yeah, there's
So-
no discipline.
I think I understand how these tools are used, and I think I would maybe recommend that you make sure that there are basically that you differentiate between the performance, whatever you want to call the performance improvement plan that doesn't come with that. If you don't succeed on this, you will face disciplinary actions that could include up to dismissal. That those kinds of performance plans that aren't that are really just more of the coaching, that we maybe call them something different so it's not confused, and then so people know when they're on administrative probation and it's that kind of plan that might lead to dismissal if they're not successful, then that's what they're on, and that's different and more serious.
So I think there's a couple ways we could address that, but the simplest way would be if it's a PIP plan that is just a coaching plan, to say this is not intended to be disciplinary. This is not intended to be something that is included under 2 point, whatever it is that identifies it. So I think we could include that in the PIP and say that and probably be safe in that regard. The other way to do it would be, and again, I'm not a big advocate of creating policy upon policy upon policy, would be to identify it in a policy and indicate that it could be a disciplinary or it could be non-disciplinary, and it would be stated one way or another in the performance improvement plan, whichever one it was. I'm a bigger advocate of not creating more policies than are necessary, but again, I think we could address that in the language of the PIP if we needed to. Were you able to hear that, Fran?
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Mhm.
Yes, I would just say, I think you could tell from our questions that we were a little bit confused on kind of the difference between the not so serious plan and the very serious plan.
Yeah.
And so perhaps employees could also have that confusion.
Yeah, I get it 100%. Yeah, and I think, again, it would be the language perhaps that would be included in the PIP saying we don't intend this to be disciplinary. This is coaching. This is, purely, for well, I think you could say purely for coaching purposes, but I think we could address that in the language.
So what are the prospective consequences of failure to succeed in the context of the performance improvement plan? And it's without consequence?
So everything would be different. So it just depends upon what is it that's making this happen in the first place. So if it is solely a non-disciplinary aspect, the consequences would be, again, there may have to be some decisions about whether you can continue in that place, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we move you to something less complicated. There can be a number of things, but again, I don't know that in every, well, I don't want to speak for Marie or for Eric, but I think in these performance improvement plans, you're going to set out very clearly what it is you intend to achieve. If at the end of the day, a person can't achieve those things, then you run into all the causes for discipline, which could include incompetence, inefficiency, any variety of things that could be there. But I think the more language that you add into the PIPs about what the potential consequences are, the more you tend to spill into the PIP then becomes part of the disciplinary process. So I think, Jeff, I would be careful if it is a PIP that is only coaching, I would be careful to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and here's what we're going to do in terms of the plan. And I don't know that if it was just a PIP, I'd say here are the consequences of failure. I think that those have to be left open.
Yeah, I don't know if that gives me more comfort or less. to
All
be
right,
honest,
well,
Neil.
I get it, but that's why you're on the personnel board.
Kimmy, I'm interested to know what you think.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree just with the confusion and so I think if we can find a way to make it just more clear on just differentiating the two, and because I think it's a good idea to have this policy, but I just think that it's leaving a lot I don't know, just open for managers or people to determine when to use it and when to not. And I think it might confuse the employees somewhat, but yeah, so that was rambling, but I feel like there's just a little bit of work that needs to be done to clarify.
I think part of my pause is around it, where there is a policy and there's a pretty clear and there's been a lot of time put into creating a progressive discipline policy and creating these other mechanisms as a part of it, and creating a process for addressing those things through grievance, to create a seemingly parallel process that exists entirely outside of them that has potentially non-trivial consequences for the participant is a sort of problematic thing, and it lends itself to potential abuse by a manager who exercises sort of undue discretion in determining which one of those pathways to push the person down that doesn't seem subject to any sort of real clear criteria for making a determination. That's, I think, the broader sort of I don't know, trepidation that this has given me.
So real quickly, let me direct your attention to in section or policy 6.15, when we talk about disciplinary actions, we say prior to disciplinary actions, this is subsection D, by the way, prior to disciplinary action, it is recommended that employees are coached and counseled to improve performance or behavior. Please see section B of this policy. And again, it talks about causes for corrective or disciplinary action. So it does incorporate the idea of coaching and counseling. We haven't really codified what that is. And again, my own suggestion is, and perhaps the best way to say it, is that there's probably a need for flexibility on what is coaching and counseling. And if we reduce it to a specific policy that says it must always look like this, it's not always going to fit. So, again, perhaps it does give a little bit more clarity, and perhaps the better way to do this is to identify this thing called a performance improvement plan and talk about, what coaching and counseling might look like. But it always is going to segue into this subsection D, which is again, prior to this action, it's recommended that they're coached and counseled. So,
yeah, thanks, Neil. I think that does give me some comfort. I appreciate you directing me to it, particularly to the degree that, if I'm understanding this correctly, like assuming, just for the sake of this conversation, that coaching and constructive feedback include the notion of a performance improvement plan, that a consequence of that, given where it's included in the cycle here, would next sort of yield into a written reprimand, that it would follow the sort of progressive discipline chain from there, rather than potentially concluding on its own without following the rest of the chain some other more serious disciplinary consequence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It goes on to say, when coaching and constructive feedback have not yielded desired results, the progressive discipline process may be required. So perhaps we address it there. And again, it really then comes down to making sure that whatever you're giving them in coaching and counseling is clear and has clear goals and guidelines, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think when I asked the question before about what the consequence of an unsuccessful performance improvement plan might be, there was a suggestion that it might require movement into a different role or what have you. And I guess what I want to understand is that we're not going to jump directly from there to there, that if and when the performance improvement plan is unsuccessful, then it sort of triggers this progressive discipline policy where, hey, you haven't been successful. There's a written reprimand, which sort of then goes through the progressive chain. Not that it's a sort of jump ahead 3 steps
Right.
loophole where
Yeah.
someone has been unsuccessful with the performance improvement plan. Now we're going to skip the first 3 elements of progressive discipline and go to removal from role or some other more drastic consequence.
Got it.
So the way that you two have discussed it, I greatly appreciate it, because that is the intent. And I am a little reluctant to put the PIP content in the disciplinary plan because the PIP is not disciplinary. And we don't want employees to feel like it is. And, oftentimes those are training issues or just, slight modifications, whether it's in performance or behavior that truly don't rise to the occasion of being disciplinary. And we do want to afford employees those opportunities to correct that behavior or to learn more. It may not be a correction. It might simply be learning, on the job training. Not everybody comes in with the requisite skills. So I appreciate that. Going back to the administrative probation paragraph there, just in looking at it, I've been scribbling in notes as I've heard you all talk, and just a small modification that I think would make the group feel better, but it says a department director may place an employee on administrative probation. And I would suggest that we edit that to say a department director in consultation with human resources may place an employee on administrative probation. Because it certainly, to you all's point, should not be done in isolation, and it should not just be one person's decision.
And I think that will help with standardization as Kimmy described it. I think that's a good idea. Board?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. That explanation helped me, Neil, with that you walked through with the 6.15 policy. So I'm good.
Yeah, me too.
So then in terms of process, Madam Chair, we obviously have this suggested edit here that we just had. Ultimately today, all you have to do is, if you want to approve this policy 2.14 with any edits or amendments that you wish to do, much like we did last time when we had our pay plan discussion in April. So that's the business at hand as you look at these, and what other edits on this that's on the screen is what's before you in terms of action.
So do we just need a motion to approve the policy?
Policy with edits.
Okay, a motion to approve the policy with edits.
Second.
I vote in favor.
So you would ask them, Kimmy and Jeff, how they vote as well.
Okay. Sorry.
Alright.
All good.
Okay, so I'm in favor of this. Kimmy, how do you vote?
I vote. I'm in favor.
And Jeff?
I'm a yes.
So just to recap, I have, Madam Chair, a department director, comma, in consultation with human resources, comma, may place an employee. That was the edit. And then the vote was 3-0 in favor of approving the policy with that edit. Making sure we all agree? Okay. Is there anything else on the policy that you wanted to review, Dr. Peoples or Neil or the board?
I'm good.
Okay, so then I'm just gonna flip real quick. We did have, just wanted to highlight a couple policies that are being worked on, just to give you some information. I'll let Dr. Peoples speak to drug and alcohol testing, and then telework is our next one. So, Dr. Peoples?
Absolutely. So drug and alcohol testing, this is one I'm rather proud of. Probably should have been implemented some time ago, but from my mind in the workplace, it's a lot more progressive. We did have a drug and alcohol policy, as most organizations do, but it had not incorporated the use of recreational marijuana. And what does that look like in today's workplace? So this has already been implemented. It went through that process that I described at the beginning. We did have a feedback process with directors, incorporated their feedback. It is now implemented for everybody except for our fire department's labor members. We're still going through that waiting and review process to receive their comments. Which they are actually just as informational. We've had some really good discussions with them. I don't believe they have any edits to it. So I think it will be standard for the entire organization. So those are the primary changes. The other one, again, just going in terms of societal changes, previously all employees were tested, drug tested upon hire. That has now changed to the safety sensitive positions, again, with a nod at looking at how society has changed in terms of marijuana. It certainly is not recreational in Missouri yet, but it takes into account medicinal marijuana for that testing as well. Again, focusing on the safety sensitive positions. And then I have no crystal ball, but it would not surprise me if we went as other states have at some point in time and did have recreational marijuana. And so the policy language will be easy to adapt for whenever that day occurs. Had a lot of feedback, of course, from our police departments and public works departments into crafting this policy, and all of those have been incorporated. So again, this one is in place. Just wanted to share it with you as we're really trying to update our policies and have a more employee focused, if you will, view of the policies and how we operate. Any questions or discussion on it? Okay.
So this is a very draft policy, which is in that first part of review by the organization and directors and being sent around. But one of the hallmarks when both Dr. Peoples and I came to the city of Webster Groves that was surprising to us is that during COVID, none of the city was able to work remotely. We have not had the information technology infrastructure to the point where while we have ordered and want Wi-Fi, we still don't have Wi-Fi in City Hall. And so we are working on that, but ultimately with that comes the ability to move into teleworking or remote work possibilities. And we do certainly have some positions that almost up to full-time, or at least for some portion of time, could be remote working. And so we wanted to be ahead of that and looked at some of our comparables and best practice organizations with a telework / remote working policy. So this is a draft, which we encourage you to look at and give us any feedback. It doesn't have to be now if you have ideas as well. Being in the industry, we'd love to hear them about what we are looking to do here in allowing for remote work to happen for the city of Webster Groves. So this is not yet implemented. This is just being circulated for that review period and comments and such to allow employees to work remote.
And would it be full-time remote work, or?
It could be up to, so could be whatever works right in the plan that is approved.
There's different provisions within the policy, and actually the deadline for the comments has passed. It just passed this week. So I've gotten all the comments back and have been massaging those into it. Received really good questions, comments, and areas to massage. But to your question, it could be permanently, but it could also be for short-term projects. If there's something that somebody's been assigned and there's really not a business reason that they have to physically be here, they could do that short-term project remotely. So it allows for that. Intermittence, we see there situational telework. We have a lot of different definitions in there. So really just trying to be flexible. And there might be employee situations that they may request, at situational or intermittence, whether it's a health reason, perhaps a childcare reason, whatever that reason is, could we adapt to that for whatever requested period of time? So again, I think it's pretty future forward, or a little bit behind since we haven't been doing this, but we hope to, and to be able to give employees that flexibility.
And just to add one other aspect of this, certainly we're not driven by this as it's not yet a city policy, but we're aware that it will likely be at some point. And that's the city's proposed sustainability plan that exists. How do we manage both our facilities and our use of facilities, and that's impact on energy use and climate and sustainability issues. We are a city that has not, if you look down to that hoteling station, you are all familiar with that idea. That has never been a really embraced culture thing. You're in the city, everyone has their office and has their space. And, if you're gone for 3 weeks or, out on leave, it just sits there and it's open, right? And it's not, we have a more efficient use of space and resources, namely in that natural resources as well, that we could potentially achieve with remote work.
I'm sure Worldwide Technologies has some strong feelings on how teleworking might operate.
We do. I think that, things have changed so much, I think before, I can just share our perspective. So before the pandemic, I think the pain point for many companies was if they are open to teleworking, how do they decide who gets to do it? And, are there criteria? And if it's not working out, can you make that person come back and all those things? I can tell you now that at least at Worldwide Technology, it's very, very much employee driven. I think we're seeing how some of other companies are struggling with retention when they're forcing people to come back like 5 days a week. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible, but it's only been like our offices have only been open for 2 months. So we're still working all that out.
Sure.
I don't know if we're going to have to get more rules based in the future. So yeah, that's my
So in this instance, I will tell you, having been there when the pandemic first started, they simply had to either close down or keep people in, and there were some risks, and there will be other things that present. But we have had employees that have had to separate who might have been able to continue to work at home, but we had no ability to accommodate that. So again, as Dr. People said, there are opportunities that are in here that I think just simply bring us into the 21st century. And so I think this, from my perspective, it's nice to see this.
And I appreciate, Ms. Barbera, you sharing your workplace situation, because there's so many unknowns with this. And I come from an organization that did do quite a bit of teleworking, but it's different in governments, as it is with many organizations. And, no matter how robust and a prescriptive policy we have laid out, there will just be some positions that can't do it. And so it is a matter of how do you select those employees. And, some of our departments, as all things, it's a little bit across the board. Some of the departments are very open to it, and it will work with the type of work that they do for residents of the community. But other services, our firefighters, our police officers, they can't telework. This isn't going to apply to them. But yet and still, we still wanted their feedback on it. So I am sure that of all of our policies that will continue to evolve, probably the drug and alcohol testing and the telework policy will continue to evolve as society evolves. Fun times.
Madam Chair, if there's no more questions on that, our last item is just, we want to give you an update on the job description project. It's brief, but almost all of the job descriptions have been rewritten and sent through as part of the compensation and classification study. This was a piece of that study with the consultants. They have rewritten the first draft. All directors and the managers have taken a look at those drafts, made some edits, and sent them all back. So now we're waiting on final product, which will be the first comprehensive job description update in some time here at the city. They've been modified year over year, but I had a position that is coming open here that I was beginning recruitment on, and had not been changed since 2004. Not just simply because, it's a one incumbent type of position. And if there was no openings, why change the job description? Well, much has changed in government accounting since 2004. So anyways, my point being is that project is ongoing, and I believe our timeline is mid-July. Am I correct?
It is.
Mid-July, we should have those back, and our job descriptions will be posted on the website, on the employee page, so employees can see them, and potential job seekers as well can see our category of job descriptions.
I think I shared this with you last time. And again, not necessarily your purview. I really appreciate you all's expertise as we try to be more customer service and that whole government transparency that we're really trying to live. But we now have our personnel manual online for anybody to review, which I think is really important for prospective employees, that to know what type of organization we are. So that's why we're going to continue updating our policies, because they are woefully outdated. But we want people to see, where are we going? We also, as Eric said, will have the job descriptions up. For me, that's huge. I think people should be able to look at all of our job descriptions, our salary ranges, all of the things that we have. So our website, I'm really proud of the work that Eric and his team have done on that, is to continue to be more transparent. I think we're the only ones looking at it, but that's not the point. So.
Well, it sounds like, I'm sure that's been a lot of work, and yeah, so good job.
We have nothing else. So just a quick update. The pay plan, which you approved last in April at our last meeting, the city council has done its first and second reading on those ordinances. We fully expect them next Tuesday night to pass the new pay system, the 17 grades which you approved as part of the pay plan last time we met. So those employees would be affected on July 2nd with the new pay grades and the increases that are allotted in the budget by the council.
Thanks for that update.
No problem.
Okay,
Then, Madam Chair, if you have nothing else, I think you ask for a motion to adjourn. That needs to get seconded and then voted upon.
Okay, does someone want to move to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
And does that mean we are adjourned?
That's what
Just
it
say
is.
it. That's what it means,
Okay.
yep.
thank you all again. I really appreciate your time.
All
All
right.
right, thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Stay